So, like as I am, involved in all kinds of, wicked things, um, doing drugs and, smoking weed, I just feel like, I'm on top of the world. Like I'm this, uh, like I'm a somebody, like I'm a tough guy, and I was full of arrogance. Like I didn't see how blinded that, I really was. As a kid, a 15-year-old kid, you're like, I felt like I was better than everybody. Like I had this egotistical thing about me. Um, I thought I was living the life. I was living the young life that if you didn't do this thing, you were not having fun. That you were ruining your life. That was my mindset. I used to always say, you only live once. Um, and but so there was pride in me, and I was always, if people made me mad, I was cussing them out, or I was, telling somebody off. Um, I was involved in sexual immorality and the occult. Uh, I swear like a sailor, and I was just a really bad guy. I was a sinner. I needed Christ, and you know once I was in high school, I had a lot of anxiety. I had a lot of um, uh, depression, and um, I didn't enjoy doing drugs. They got to a point where I just didn't enjoy it. The Bible says sin is pleasurable for a season. I liked it for a while, and then I just stopped liking it. Um, and I would get even more anxiety when I would smoke it or drink it, and I was just going through the motions, and like I was, uh, it just became more and more severe, especially in 2012. People saying that the world was going to end. Like uh, once we got closer and closer, um, after a while, I became very scared, because I didn't have faith. I wasn't a man of faith. I wasn't a man of the Bible, and I didn't really believe the Bible. And I thought, well, it's possible the world could end. And I was um, going into 2012, and I was wondering, maybe that's going to be at the end of 2012. That was going to be the end of the world, and so that's what that was what triggered a lot of my anxiety, along with the drugs. And I remember, just going out, and I was at a party, and I go and I look up at the moon, and I'm just like wondering, how much time we have left, how much time I have left. And all throughout that summer, it just got worse. I felt, kind of isolated, didn't see anybody, and my depression, my anxiety, it was skyrocketing out of control. Uh, and there was one time where I uh, I had to go to the hospital because I had a panic attack. Um, so I got taken to the hospital. They tested me. They said that I was okay. They said that uh, death is a part of life, because I was scared of death after a loved one had passed away. Um, they said that the doctor had to have a talk to me when I was like, I don't know, 14, 15 years old. And he said, death is a part of life, and that's what he told me. And he said that one day we're all going to die. And that was always in the back of my mind, when I was going through life, as a young adolescent. I was thinking about mortality, and I thought about hell, and I realized I wasn't living for God, and I knew that deep down, I was going to hell, that I was a sinner, that I needed grace, that I needed the cross. Um, Back then, I didn't even understand that. I didn't even know what the cross was about. I knew about it, but I didn't truly know the gospel. Um, and you know, uh, as I was doing drugs, I saw overdoses. multiple ones, not just one, which resulted in, people going to the hospital. One of them was right in front of me, firsthand. Thankfully, nobody was killed, but it was some very close stuff that really had me getting scared, really seeing the dark side of drugs. Uh, so that triggered, even more anxiety. Um, so I'm thinking about mortality. I'm seeing what drugs can do. I'm seeing the damage it's doing. I see the damage that it's done to other people and what it's doing in my life. So right around this time, you know, when I'm 16, I'm walking home from school. And there's a guy out there, and he a random stranger that I had never seen in my entire life. Um, when you go on walks from school, you don't generally see just a random stranger out there handing out a Bible. Okay, so I know that there's something providential about this. I know that God is giving me this sign that He's getting my attention. He hands me this New Testament because he says, "Hey, you want a New Testament? You want a Bible?" I'm like, "Sure." I didn't even want it, but there was something down inside that was just telling me not to say no. At first, maybe it was because I didn't want to be rude, but I took it and I wasn't even going to read it. I was going to throw it away. But I kept it. And it was almost just like it was all just played out. Like there was something being orchestrated. Okay, so, I kept that. I held on to that New Testament. So there's a show, that, talked about the Bible, talked about the gospel. And I saw it a few times when I was a kid. And I kind of ignored it. And I didn't really pay much attention to it. I watched it on occasion. They would share, inspirational stories and stuff like that. And at first I really didn't like it, but then I kind of saw, this is kind of interesting, and sometimes it would come on. And at first I didn't like it, but when they would say things on that and talk about the Bible, it would get my attention. And there was a couple other shows that would come on, stuff that I wouldn't even pay attention to. It was just like on these channels that I would watch. And I watched a lot of wicked stuff. Like I watched MTV. I watched back then it was called ABC Family sometimes, which is not in itself wicked. Maybe it has some wicked shows. I don't even remember everything that they had on it. But I would just watch these gangster rap music videos, and that was a lot of what I listened to. I would watch stuff on Adult Swim, and it would have sex, violence, cussing. I would watch horror films with gore and blood, and I just watched a lot of wicked stuff. But sometimes when I would watch these channels, there would be these paid programming things come on, and they would come on sometimes in like the morning or and during summer of around that year. During 2012, there would be more of these channels of these shows that would come on, and they would be talking about the Bible. They'd be talking about the gospel, and I didn't even watch them, but I would hear them talk. And a lot of the times they got my attention about, how I'm not living for the Lord, how I'm neglecting the Bible, and that I really need to start reading it. And I felt that conviction. I started to feel convicted about my lifestyle. So, so that was really where it all started. So, I would, pick it up and I would start to read the New Testament. And I remember one of the first things I would read was about Jesus, about the life of Jesus, about how he healed people. And, I was really amazed by some of the miracles that they would say about how he opened the eyes of the blind and how he would heal people with diseases. And, it was like every time he would speak, I had so much conviction of it. And I would just hear truth. It was like the Bible was jumping out of the pages and speaking to me. So that was really all where my conviction began. and then I would have to go to a crossroads, and I would have to make a decision about what I wanted to do.